well. I am very pleased to have the opportunity to present to you Dr. Raywat Deonandan, Associate Professor at the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. Professor Deonandan obtained his PhD in epidemiology and biostatistics from the University of Western Ontario in 2001. He was then hired as a biomedical literature analyst by Social and Scientific Systems Incorporated in Washington, D.C. Thankfully, he returned to Canada in 2004 and worked as a clinical epidemiologist for CHIO and as an epidemiologist for the Center of Excellence for Child-Youth Mental Health in Ottawa. In 2007, he became the chief scientist for Assisted Human Reproduction Canada. And in 2008, he was recruited by the University of Ottawa as an assistant professor and was promoted to associate professor in 2018. He has received numerous awards, prestigious awards, such as the Western Alumni Award of Merit for Professional Achievement at the University of Western Ontario in 2022. The Dean's Award of Excellence at the Faculty of Social Sciences in 2020 and more. He's published over 89 peer-reviewed articles, more than 122 newspaper articles, and he's regularly solicited to give talks, deliver workshops, and share insights and opinions on critical topics that are current in the society. Professor Deonandan, thank you very much for making time for us and for accepting to share your knowledge and expertise on how to best communicate our research finding with the world. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. That guy sounds cool. Can I meet him? Is he coming? All right. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. All right. Excellent. It's people online, you don't know, it's standing room only here. The place is jam-packed. I asked earlier, are you all grad students? Okay, who are you? What's the deal here? Undergrad? Yeah. Excellent.
Undergrad as well.
Excellent.
I'm working with life and
That's a thing.
Professor in psychology.
I know Nafisa.
I'm in grad school at Queen's for infection prevention and control.
Queens, actually, you came all the way here for this?
Online, so I live here.
Excellent, excellent. And people online, I won't bother, there are thousands of you. Thank you all for coming. This is my absolute pleasure to be here. And today, what I'm going to do is cover 5 things. And I got a lot of slides. I mean, a lot of slides. I'm going to go through them pretty fast. I'm going to skip a few. I'm going to point to 1 or 2 and not read everything that's on them. It was all just stream of consciousness. I'll talk about my path to being science communication, because it has to be a little bit about me. And then we'll talk about models of science, and particularly health science communication. Maybe some of you have been exposed to that, maybe you haven't, because we need a scholastic, boring academic component to this as well. And that'll be the scholastic component. We'll talk a bit about plain language, which is all the rage, especially in government. And I think it's important for students in particular to learn to communicate and to write in plain language. So what is that? I'll go over just briefly a little bit about media training. We don't do media training in grad faculties. We probably should, because increasingly you're called upon to talk to the media, and not just media, just the public in general. So what does that mean? What's expected of you, and what are some of the tricks you can follow? And lastly, I'll mention some of the tools I've engaged, by which I mean the tools in media that we can use to access the world. It isn't just about peer-reviewed papers. God knows it is not about peer-reviewed papers, because nobody reads peer-reviewed papers, especially not mine. Right. I have to share that because I find this picture hilarious. All right. So I'm also going to talk about mostly about public health communication, because I'm in public health. But the lessons can be exported to pretty much all facets of scholastic communication, in particular science communication. A lot of this is, the presentation is distilled from my summer course, POP 8950. If you want to take it, please do. Last year, 2 people took it. So we need more people signing up. It's asynchronous and online. And as well, I offer a Udemy course if you want to pay out of pocket, which is also asynchronous on the same topic. So my path, that is not me. but I do dress like that. Back in the pandemic, start of the pandemic in 2020, my spouse was pregnant. I was on maternity leave. I'm an epidemiologist. I wasn't paying attention to COVID or what was going to be called COVID soon. My students were emailing me, asking me about it. I was saying, I don't know, I'm busy. About to be a father. Then one night, just as the lockdown started, I decided to do some modeling, not this kind, this kind of modeling. And I figured out that this is not going to last weeks, it's going to last years. And the media is not reporting on that yet. A handful of epidemiologists knew that, but the majority really weren't aware of the true impact and extent of this crisis. And I didn't know it. Like, I thought, my goodness, my elderly parents might die never having seen their grandchild. Who knows how long this lockdown will last? And so my spouse found me in the fetal position the next morning because I didn't know what to do. And it dawned on me that one day my child will say, Dad, you're an epidemiologist. What did you do in the great pandemic of 2020? So, well, I'm not working right now. I'm on paternity leave. What can I do? Well, I'm a writer. Let's write about it. So I wrote a blog post called COVID-19, What's the End Game? Okay? And I talked about herd immunity in very basic lay language. And usually my blog gets about 200 readers a week. This one got 500,000 in like a day. And then I realized, oh my goodness, people want to know about this stuff. And the phone started ringing and media was calling all the time because no one at that time, no epidemiologists at that time were actually speaking in lay language for the general public and for media. And they wanted very basic stuff. That started me on the path of being essentially a full-time science communicator for the next 2 or 3 years. So over the course of 3 years of the pandemic, I did over 3,000 media engagements. It was a full-time, 3,000. Since then, I've consulted on over a dozen court cases, lawsuits involving COVID-19. And that requires, again, communicating to non-experts, in particular, judges, language they can understand and adhere to. I've advised drug companies, media, and so forth. Got a lot of hate mail, a lot of threats of physical violence that comes as part of this process. We will hopefully be able to talk about that today, because now when we engage with the public as scientists, it comes at a cost that was not there a generation ago. Get a lot more love letters, and we don't talk about that enough, right? A lot more gratitude than hate, but we tend to focus on the hate for philosophical and personal fragility reasons, and we shouldn't. We should focus on the love. It's been exhausting, but worthwhile. Okay, so whenever I talk about communicating in health science, public health, I start with a paper from, I think, 2007 that talked about the lessons we learned from SARS-1. And it found 3 lessons. Number 3 was animal husbandry is bad for human health. That's part of my vegan propaganda. Go with it, it's great. Number 2 is that the old technologies work best. In other words, mask wearing and hiding in your house work best. That's fine. Number 1, though, transparency is the best policy. In other words, communicating everything we know, not trying to curate information, not trying to manage our audience, but just being open with what we know and don't know. That was the important takeaway. And we did not learn from that. So when COVID came along, we did not follow any of these lessons. So what is then the role of a science communicator or a health communicator or a public health communicator? There is no obvious answer, but I would say there are about 5 things. You talk to the public about the nature of the emergency. In this case, we're talking about emergency. We don't have to. 2, you enumerate the steps that we're taking to address it. 3, you inform the public of what they need to do. 4, explain the underlying science, which is what I think we should be doing more of and what I hope to invest in graduate students to be able to do better going forward in non-emergency times. And lastly, to maybe assuage panic. I say maybe because I'm not sure that's our role. I think that's the role of authority figures and the police, people like that. But for scientists, maybe it's time to panic. If it's time to panic, tell people. There's an asteroid about to fall on your heads. Maybe it's time to run away. So the last part about assuaging panic, that falls into the category of behavioral change. So are we in the business of changing behavior? I would argue no. Some would argue yes. Let's talk about this. So if you think back on the anti-smoking and safe sex campaigns from decades past, there was an effort to change behavior. But sometimes being transparent with the information does not lead to behavioral change, and that actually complicate behavioral change. So oftentimes that relationship depends on trust. If the public or the audience doesn't trust you as an authority figure, none of this works. So I'm really cognizant of making sure we don't compromise trust in an attempt to change behavior. Because the second you compromise trust, you've lost everything and you can't win it back. Right now in society, we have a crisis. No one trusts the elite. Who are the elite? Government. Everybody in this room, we're the elite. Nobody trusts. So with the non-smoking campaign, here are a couple of real ads. You know, they're pretty hideous ads. One shows a diseased lung, another shows a dead body post-autopsy. At what point do we say this is no longer about informing the public and more about compelling them towards a certain action? So the tobacco companies have argued successfully in court that this is too much, that at this point, everybody knows smoking's bad for you. What are you trying to do, right? If you don't want people to smoke, just make it illegal already. And if you're not going to make it illegal, then let them smoke. That's their argument, and I think it holds a little bit of weight. So these ads were eventually pulled from most jurisdictions based upon these complaints. Here's a picture I took in the Toronto subways back in, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I wrote a paper about it. If you can't see it, what it says is, do you know that 86% of HIV positive Canadians are male and 2/3 of boys aged 15 to 19 are sexually active? Think your kids aren't at risk? Think again. Okay, so the message there is kind of clear. You know, if you've got a son, then he's at risk for getting HIV/AIDS, and 86% is a large number. Problem is, it's not. Right? The prevalence of HIV among Canadian male youth at that time, when I took that picture, was 0.03%. The 86% number is not a risk number. It's a distribution. It's not the same thing. And they know that. I mean, they mean well, CanSpar, who did the ad, they know that, but they're trying to compel a certain action using the biggest number they could find. They're not being transparent about what that number actually means. I would argue you lose trust by doing so. Here's another one. This is from Ernestine's Women's Shelter. It shows 3 to 5 children in every Canadian classroom have witnessed their mother being assaulted. 70% of men in court-ordered treatment for domestic violence witness it as a child. Okay, if you read that fast walking by, you think, oh my goodness, then if my child sees domestic abuse, he's going to be an abuser. The cycle of violence continues. Except again, 70% is technically not epidemiological risk. It's not, it's distribution. It offers no insight into that fraction of kids who saw abuse who did not become abusers, who actually the overwhelming majority. Again, I'm not saying you should let your child witness abuse. I'm not saying you should abuse anybody. I'm saying these numbers convey a certain intent and content that maybe is not truly accurate. In fact, many psychologists really were offended by this kind of thing because they would argue that you are casting aspersions on people, assuming that they will become abusers just because they saw it. The cycle of abuse is not a guaranteed thing. The lesson here is that communication, while well-intentioned, has a history of misrepresenting the numbers in a dishonest way. And that has bled into distrust. That's part of why we have a crisis of distrust right now. Not the entire reason, but part of it. And that set the table for an entire industry dedicated to undermining health credibility, science credibility. That's what we have today. Okay? Because the pandemic came. And the pandemics have a way of exacerbating divides in society, ideological divides, socioeconomic divides, even ethnic divisions. Rich and poor have dealt with it differently. The right and left politically obviously deal with this differently. And in your own lives, you've probably seen relationships fragment under the pandemic because people saw the data differently. They saw the risk differently. Strained relationships, what we have now. So emotions are raw. Everybody feels attacked, including this guy. And it's pretty dangerous being a public commentator. I was on TV yesterday morning. Sure, I got a lot of compliments, some hate mail too. Every single time I'm getting hate mail, even if they say something really banal, right? That's where we are now. It's a minefield as a communicator. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It means you should do it more, frankly. Okay, Neil deGrasse Tyson, love this guy, but. He has argued for a long time that scientists should be accessible to the world because most people will never meet a scientist. So now's their big chance to ask you questions. Let them ask questions. If he goes to a bar, people ask him questions. He says, yes, when's the next time you will meet an astrophysicist? Problem is, Nobody's identity or ideology is shaped by their understanding of black holes. And you can talk endlessly about the event horizon of black holes and, oh, well, yeah, that's interesting. But health, which is what I do, what many of you do, everyone's got a stake in personal health and in public health. Everyone's got an opinion. Everything you say will trigger somebody who disagrees with you, who's on the RFK bandwagon, something like that. Whereas no one fights with astrophysicists, except now they fight with him because he's entered the fray into other kinds of political topics. And that leads us to these troubling kinds of statistics, where now the fraction of people who believe it is okay to harass public health figures is up. They believe it's justified. And look at 25%. Oh my goodness, that's an enormous fraction of people who think it's okay to harass public figures. Okay, I got a lot of stuff to talk about, so I'm moving really fast. If you want to stop me, just let me know. Can someone monitor the online chat in case someone wants to? Okay.
We are monitoring.
That's good. So let's talk a bit about disinformation. That's part of what we're combating here as scientists, talking in public. And disinformation we saw really come to the fore during COVID because it was spread by, frankly, well-funded, organized foreign actors. Right? Some nations were investing heavily in disinformation infrastructure. I won't go too deep into what that is, but they use mostly social media to weaponize their language. And so the role of a science communicator becomes almost a warrior on social media, fighting back against those who are just spouting nonsense. And often it's by YouTube or meme, and memes are quite clever and difficult to do well. And here's this, I don't want to pick on Russia, but a lot of this did come from Russia and Belarus and some from China. And maybe we have our own disinformation agents working in those parts of the world. I don't know. But there's a lot of data from State Department and from intelligence agencies that dissect the methods by which foreign disinformation agents really created chaos in the way we communicate science here. As well, we have well-funded anti-science or skewed science messaging from well-funded local endeavors. So if you don't know who the Koch brothers are, they're extreme right-wing, couple of brothers who just fund these particularly problematic ideological positions. So they were funding all these organizations that are anti-maskers, especially masking in school, for whatever political reasons you might imagine. We have anti-vaccine groups on Facebook that were poisoning the well about COVID vaccines before we had COVID vaccines, as far back as March or April of 2020, when the idea of a COVID vaccine was some sort of wish. Nobody saw it coming that fast, right? But already there are people who are saying, don't trust this thing that doesn't exist yet. So the problem with combating misinformation and disinformation, by the way, you know the difference. So misinformation is just getting stuff wrong. Disinformation is intentionally getting stuff wrong to create chaos and for an ideological end. The problem of using social media as your battleground is that a YouTube clip reaches millions of people in minutes, but a peer-reviewed paper, which is what we do, will take weeks and months, possibly years, and typically read by 2 people. There was a study a while back that looked at the average number of readers for a peer-reviewed paper. I don't know if that includes the authors. Probably not, right? So the asymmetric warfare becomes obvious here. Now, we, meaning we on the science side, are catching up. We have our own social media warriors with excellent YouTube channels now. They don't have quite the reach as the disinformation, YouTube platforms and Twitter accounts, because they haven't got a billionaire backing them, But it's starting, the process is starting. Changing tack, because I got a lot of stuff to cover. Another thing that really makes the sea of receiving science information complicated is people's innate discomfort with uncertainty. Science does not offer certainty. That's a hope you have embraced since then, right? In fact, the more you progress in science, the more uncertain you become about everything. And yet the public wants certainty, and we can't offer certainty. In fact, a lot of studies here, here's one I've cited here, where people reading about the uncertainty in COVID-19 created measurable traumatic stress at a psychological level in a lot of people. And I encounter that so much online. People want to know, can you guarantee me that if I take this vaccine? No, I can't. And then they get really angry when I can't guarantee things. And this is a real problem. So again, a lot of work is being done on this. The public doesn't understand how science works. They don't understand that we are stumbling through the process looking for answers for now, and then a week from now, our answers might change as more data become available. They don't understand that. That's a failure of our education system. We have not inoculated, unintended, the public against bad ideas around inoculation. And so they want certainty and they want it now. They want it like Wikipedia. Now, there are two kinds of uncertainty, at least. There's probability uncertainty. Example here, I would say something like the current COVID vaccine has 60% efficacy against hospitalization. It's true, it does. And someone on social media will say, but my uncle got it and he's in the ICU now. Okay, but is he typical? And that does not penetrate into the way of thinking. That's one kind of discomfort with us. The other kind is not understanding, again, as I said, the nature of science is fundamentally about uncertainty. So the mantra I repeat to myself before I go on TV or something is, all of this is true until further notice. I want people to understand this is based on the current data. And when they talk to me a month from now, I might change my mind if new data comes along. The public needs to understand that. Related to that kind of uncertainty is the inability to appreciate abstract data. So the example I have here is, you probably encountered this in your life. I've got so many examples of this. You're driving to the beach and people say, oh, the beach is like a mile away. I'm not gonna wear my seatbelt, what'll happen? And they're terrified of shark attacks when they get to the beach. How many shark attacks happen every year? Like one around the globe? I don't know, probably a couple hundred globally, I don't know. But your chance of getting in an accident, not wearing your seatbelt, having a bad outcome, considerable, substantial. So the inability to parse that comparative risk is at epidemic levels. I don't blame people for that because one, hey, if I'm hit by a car and up in the hospital, okay, if I'm eaten by a shark, that's horrific. Okay, so the level of horror is not attuned and correlated with the actual amount of risk that's prevalent. I have an entire paper that compares that, looking at a sexual dynamic as well. People are far more afraid of the stigma of a bad sexual encounter, like leads to an STD, an STI rather, than they are of even a low risk environment, than they are of a extremely high risk, but less stigmatizing car accident. So it's fascinating. And then we have professionals amplifying misinformation. So most recent one that came to mind was a lot of doctors are recommending that their patients don't get the updated flu vaccine or COVID vaccine because they don't really understand why they should. They don't understand population risk. That leads to public misunderstanding. So we're left with, again, a crisis of trust. No one knows who to trust, this guy or that guy or the Russian guy. And it'll take generations to repair, really will. We've got to start now, right? I think we begin with transparency by having real numbers and honesty about what those numbers mean, what they don't mean, and what I know and don't know what they mean. It's okay to say, I don't know. That's something we have to get used to. Silence and ignorance are things we can embrace as scientists. And we have to invest in science literacy and numeracy going forward. And we train science students how to communicate well. All right, moving on to the really boring part of this. Models of health communication or science communication or health science communication in general. And have any of you been exposed to any sort of models of communication before? I bet you have, you're nodding along. Okay, so I'm gonna look at you then. You can fact check me as I go. Okay, well, models, who cares about models? Who cares? I mean, but when you're actually doing communication, you don't think about what model you're using. You think about it maybe after the fact, because, oh, I was using that model and therefore it has these flaws and those advantages. But it's important to know that there are different approaches. Come on, it's okay. There are different approaches. That's my grad student, by the way, and she's late. So yeah, you don't need to know what model you're using, but being aware that models exist. So the first and most common one is the knowledge deficit model. And everyone begins here, and most people assume that this is all there is. What is it? It's really assuming that no one knows things, and if I just tell them the things they don't know, then my job is done. It's all about filling the deficit of knowledge. And you can use, again, lectures, books, brochures, public health campaigns, media. Typical media broadcast is a knowledge deficit filling. You know, like news will say, oh, you didn't know this? Here, now you know. Next topic. Right? In other words, if you give the people the information they want, they will run with it. Sorry, am I blocking you? I didn't realize that. They will run with it. And stand over here. That changes everything. You can see the screen. Okay, I won't go through all the text. It's really boring stuff. The elements of a deficit model is there is public skepticism towards science, and that skepticism is caused by a lack of knowledge. That's the assumption. And if you provide the knowledge they lack, everything is great. And things you can do in this domain are, you know, magazine articles, documentaries, podcasts, lectures. Something should jump out at you with those examples. That something is that the people who consume these are people who want to know about them, right? So they're looking to have that deficit filled. So automatically they're they're a specialized audience. They're not typical of the whole world. And it comes from a problematic gap between those who have knowledge and those who don't. Again, the societal stratification of knowledge. And we assume that because that stratification exists, remove the stratification, everything's hunky-dory. So the goal is to transfer knowledge from one individual or group to another. Knowledge transfer, knowledge translation. You've heard those terms, I'm sure. Buzzwords for the era. And they keep evolving. Now we're talking about knowledge mobilization, in other words, because it keeps evolving. We'll touch upon that as well. So it centers on an explanation of the relationship between science and society as communication one. But is it sufficient? Does it work? Obviously not. I wouldn't be talking about it. Here's an example. Explaining science does not get people to accept it. There's a paper that looked at this, and they found, I won't go into the details about the study. It looked at teaching people about climate change. It found first that acceptance of science has nothing to do with people knowing. It's possible to know a lot of science and yet not accept it. Weird, right? Has more to do with ideology and values. In fact, more people, more knowledge led to less acceptance of science in this study, which is strange. In other words, people can agree that scientists think this, but I don't have to think it. And climate change really comes to the fore about this. Climate deniers accept that absolutely scientists believe climate change is real. I know that, 100% of them, but I don't need to think that because my friends and I have this cultivated knowledge environment and we think differently. So simply telling them more things will not change their belief system. So the takeaway is just increasing literacy won't change minds. Okay? The problem is once you present facts that are in conflict with someone's ideology, they might actually retreat deeper into their ideology. They feel attacked. That's they call that the backfire effect. Okay, next is the dialogue model. What is it? Well, hey, it's having a dialogue. So workshops, sign cafes, and so forth. So it's there's a quote here: an imperfect but substantial improvement on the deficit model. The dialogue model calls for exactly what the name implies, talking to stakeholders. So we have dialogue between scientists and stakeholders. You know what a cafe scientifique is? HR used to organize these things. It's when you take some scientists, you just got a grant, you put them in front of a public, like in a pub or something, and you talk and people ask questions. Town hall, they're great. They're actually pretty cool things. Public workshops like this is potentially the dialogue model. Interactive exhibitions, a social media conversation can be dialogue as well. That's great. The audience are no longer passive recipients of knowledge, they're engaged to some extent. So our role as experts is no longer to simply give knowledge, we're supposed to assess that the knowledge is well received and also invest in that relationship. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm investing in a relationship with you. That's why I had nothing to do with the pizza you have back there. Taking credit for it. There's pizza. That's for you, Chad. There's pizza. Okay, so the goal of a dialogue model is to build a relationship. And the assumption is if I have a relationship, you're more likely to accept what I say. And that's absolutely true. Now, it's difficult to build a relationship with someone who's automatically or who begins from a position of distrust and in opposition to you. I really struggle with this, especially with talking to people online. I do find, though, that treating people with respect online and then try to build that relationship helps for some, not with many. And I say that as someone who gets into a lot of Twitter fights and calls people names, so I'm not maybe the best example of that, but I have tried. There's something called the participatory model. That sounds a little bit like a dialogue model. Hi. So examples of this would be like social media surveys or public contributions to disease surveillance. What it is, it's allowing the public to be a part of the data collection process in a limited sense, to give them buy-in into the process. Obviously, as scientists yourselves, you collected your data and done your work, looking to communicate it. It's too late for that. But if you're starting from scratch and thinking about how can I get public buy-in to this, and investing in their participation early on would be a strategy. Why? Because exactly what I said, public buy-in is important. The problem, of course, is that often if you have the public as part of your data collection process, there's less rigor in science. Because the public isn't very good at science while you're highly trained in the process. And when was the last time you completed a survey with the promise of a free Amazon gift card? You're not going to give your best answers. You're doing it for the gift card. So there's the incentivization issues. The context model, I'm going through these models, not the meat what I want to do with you guys, but I want you to get some academic rigor from this as well. The context model understands that everyone comes to this knowledge from a context specific to your experience. So what is it? Well, if we define it as bidirectional transfer of information, then we have to be aware of each other's context, rationale for saying what we do and why we do something. In other words, everyone needs to know what the exchange is about. So the context, there's individual context, age, gender, your educational background. And think about that for a second. It's fairly obvious, especially if you're dealing with people on Twitter. I can give information about vaccine efficacy. 100 different people will come to me with 100 different responses and perspectives and see it in a different way, depending upon their age, gender, educational background, country of origin, personal experiences, all that stuff. Maybe their social networks affect their ability to receive information. Of course it does. I can tell everything about you by looking at your friends. I can tell everything about how you're going to think about something by looking at how your friends think about things. So our social networks really matter. Cultural context. Example, vaccine campaigns, different regions, because different regions have different beliefs around science vaccination. Societal context, oh my goodness. So different societies have different attitudes around public health, around science, around trust in government. So the way I talk to you people is not the way I would talk to a bunch of government people or a similar lay audience in India or the Caribbean, which I have done, and it's a different audience entirely. Different, they take my words in a different context, a different way. It is fascinating. And environmental context. So what's the point of talking about vaccine efficacy if I'm talking to people who have no idea how to get a vaccine because there are no facilities where they live? So context matters. And there's the lay expertise model. This is where we really bring in the public as experts, not just participants, but literal experts. So it's not so much me giving you information you need, it's the two of us figuring out the information that we need and finding it together. It's kind of like the participatory model, but not quite. So examples, in public health, we can have, if we're talking about AIDS prevention, we can have people with direct experience with HIV communicating with members of their community, bring about better knowledge of prevention strategies. Framing. This is really interesting to me, the framing model. So how you frame a message matters a lot. What is framing? Well, framing is, do I get to the right? Okay, here's an example. They have a selection frame. So we can look at aspects of perceived reality. Let's see if I can give an example in a second. We look at what is emphasized. We can look at what is being equivalated. For example, In public health, we can look at how to prevent behaviors by using certain things. So instead of focusing on, hey, you've got skin cancer as an issue, focus on the fact that, hey, you can use these creams to prevent skin cancer. So focus on the action taken to prevent skin cancer. Or loss frame. This is when you can look at breast cancer, instead of saying you should get your breast cancer, you can get your screening done here at this age. You can talk about if you don't get the screening done, this is what will happen. How you frame it matters. So more with the framing, you can emphasize certain things too, like how you give a message matters, emphasizing these numbers rather than those numbers. I find this really interesting because the research I'm doing now is around using AI in a variety of contexts. And there is an effort now to use AI to detect disinformation around health using framing. So instead of looking up whether or not a thing that's stated is actually correct or incorrect, look at what they're trying to frame. And there are patterns in framing that disinformation merchants tend to rely upon. So you can flag like a tweet or something as likely disinformation by looking at the framing context and then investigate further. Interesting, right? Yeah. So the narrative model talks about stories. And there's a great quote, the universe is made of stories, not atoms. It's the essence of postmodernism, really. And it's absolutely true. Like, look at how every single news piece on TV you've ever seen, let's say it's a news piece about the measles vaccine having low uptake. It doesn't start with statistic. 10% fewer people this year have taken the measles vaccine. It starts with Jenny and her husband, Bob, have a child they're very concerned about. It starts with the story, a personalized story. It hooks you with a meaningful investment you have in a relationship. And that's important. So documentary films, the best ones, have personal context, stories. So, so it starts with the narrative paradigm, which is that everything occurs via storytelling. I have this image here because when I talk about this, I usually talk about an example in prehistoric times when Og and Grog were sitting by the campfire well before civilization was invented. And they're talking about the day's hunt. And how was this done? Well, they're trying to exchange information. Og is trying to show Grog the proper way of using the atlatl to bring down an antelope, whatever it might be. But he doesn't say, when you use it, you hold it like so, and you put the stick this way, and you stand like this. No, he sits by the campfire, and he tells the story of the hunt. Today we stalked the prey, and it was a big prey, and it was a very dark and stormy day, and we crawled on our bellies first, and we almost got him. All these details come into play, and he's leaning in and using his hands and using shadows, and maybe even smelling each other and seeing the sweat drip down from each other's faces. It's a full-on multimedia, multisensorial effect. And that is the origins of knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer, not typing a tweet to somebody, hey, use an atlatl by holding it this way and throwing it back. Nobody cares about that. It takes an effort in your forebrain to translate that information into digestible knowledge. Whereas we are hardwired through centuries, millennia of hunter-gatherer lifestyle to understand things via narrative. And it really helps if you frame your information in the way of a story. People will accept it far more readily. So a story should be relatable, gotta have emotional engagements, right? And maybe simple without losing content and having some sort of structure, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is obvious. I know it's obvious, but think about how many people actually do this well? Very few. How many do it poorly? Everyone does it poorly. Think about, the student theses you've read, how dry and boring they are. They don't need to be dry and boring. They can come alive. It doesn't have to be a story about, I wrote my thesis. No, it can be, you can make your dry thesis into a narrative in a way that really comes to life. That's good writing. Okay, example of using the narrative model in communication. Patient stories, right? So case studies in medical journals don't have to be, saw a patient age 45, had these tumors. It can be, a bit more engaging. Okay, all of this is the essence of what we call knowledge mobilization. A good friend of mine, Peter Levesque, one of the gurus of knowledge mobilization, used to have a mantra, and I have adopted it. Teach it to everybody like this. Essentially, what, so what, and now what? Just 3 steps. Right? So most people stop with the what. Here is the information you need. No. Why do they care? That's the so what. And if you're advanced, you stop there. That's not good enough. What should I do with this information? That's the last part. If we can get those three components into any message you're getting across, pretty much 90% of your job is done. That's where almost everybody fails, is the inability to move from what to so. Then you're in that special rarefied atmosphere if you can get from so what to now what. So if you take away nothing else from today's talk, take away that one. What, so what, now what. Okay. Now the driest part of today is over. We're going to move on to plain language. How are we doing time-wise? Oh, look at that. I'm zipping through this. I'm going to slow down a bit. Have some pizza. Okay. You have any questions or comments or jokes in the meantime? Professor, you are the joke, I know. Okay. What is plain language? How many of you have heard of plain language before? Of course you have. Okay, 3 of you. All right. The professors and the communications. That's what you study, right?
Infection prevention and control, which is.
What's plain language? It's also called plain writing, and it seems obvious. It's really, it's making sure that what you write or say, usually what you write, is understandable by the audience the first time they read it. And you do it by using the simplest, most straightforward way of writing. You don't always have to do it. Like if you're writing a journal article, don't use plain language necessarily. You're writing to your thesis supervisor, you don't have to. If you're writing for like a New York Times, it should mostly be in plain language, but not entirely. You just avoid unnecessary fanciness. And it's clear, straightforward, using only as many words as is necessary. I know I disagree with this a bit because there is room for nuance here. There's room for artistry. There's room for poetry. Not everything is, you know, a computer give me this is the information you need. No, it can be flowery a bit. Just don't make it overly complicated. So the government of Canada insists upon plain language in all its internal communication. And so I teach my students this. It's like, if you want a job with the government, learn this skill now. It'll help you in the future. Of course, with ChatGPT these days, maybe you don't need to. So the big caveat here is maybe all this is meaningless if AI can do it all for us. Maybe it can. I don't know yet. But let's assume it can't, and we'll move forward right now. So things that plain language is not. Plain language is not baby talk. It's not attempts to be playful. Right? You're not dumbing things down, not at all. You're not stripping out necessary information. You got to keep the necessary stuff in there. It's not just polishing or editing your paper after you write it, more than that. And it's not imprecise. In fact, it should be extremely precise. Here's an example. Is the capital of Canada Ottawa? Yes or no? Who knows the answer? Great, everybody got that. I need to explain it. This is a real quiz on the US government website until Elon Musk got through the website. I don't know if it's still there. Okay. Have you ever been refused admission to the US or been the subject of a deportation hearing or sought to obtain or assist others to obtain a visa, entry into the US or any other US immigration benefit by fraud or willful misrepresentation of other lawful abuse? Have you attended a US public elementary school and student F status or public? What? Now, there are people in this room with PhDs. I guarantee you, we have to read that several times to answer it correctly. There is no need for that. They need to put this through ChatGPT and say, write this in plain language. So there's a classic example where we need plain language. Not useful. Clearly, it's written in legalese to protect themselves from legal. This is part of the issues we have. Lawyers get involved and make things complicated. This is a famous memo by Winston Churchill to his staff. He first became prime minister in time of war. I won't go through all of it. Maybe I should. It's kind of an interesting memo. He's essentially begging them to speak in plain language. If you look at the details here, let us have an end to such phrases as these. It is also of importance to bear in mind the following considerations. Consideration should be given to the possibility of carrying into effect is driving him crazy. So he says, I propose The forts drawn up in the lines I propose may first seem rough as compared to the flat surface of officialese, but saving in time will be great, while the discipline of setting out the real points concisely will prove an aid to clearer thinking. He's begging his ministers to speak in plain language. It's a transformative moment in bureaucrat history. So consider, what if your audience, seniors, which will soon be one? What if they're visually impaired? What if they're stressed out? What if they're busy? What if they've got using a device where they can't read everything clearly? This is all not just not unlikely, it's extremely likely. It's not the majority of people, your audience, are going to be like this. So they haven't got time to scroll through flowery language, get to the point quickly. So how do we improve the user's environment or understanding? We write in plain language. So Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. So I gave a workshop once in Rwanda to teach public health students actually how to write for journals. And they were they're all brilliant people, and they wrote well enough for their needs, and they did excellent work, but they struggled with understanding what aspects of their work needed to be communicated, what fashion. So the advice I gave them is, you go home tonight, laying in bed with your spouse, they're all married, explain to him or her what you did today, what your work entails, in a way that they can understand it, because they're not experts. And if you can explain it to them, you can explain it to everybody else. You come back to class the next day, write that down as your method section, and then we have other exercises for the discussion section. So just explain it to someone. That'll help strip away the extraneous words. So essentially, it's reader-focused writing. Can your audience find what they need? Can they understand it once they found it? And can they then act on what they understood? Again, so what, now what? And we want them to be able to do that, to do the what, so what, now what. So explain it to them in a way that allows them to do that. So do not focus on what you want to say. Don't focus on what do I get out of this. Don't focus on, I'm trying to be impressive. Focus on, what does the audience need to know? And how can I help them? And how can what can I clearly express to them? So here's some boxes here. We'll go through each one. That really, if you focus on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 things, then you'll get to plain language. Simple words, obviously. Get rid of the jargon. Use the active voice. This is a big deal. So I'll explain that in a second. So we're trained in high school and before that to think of science as passive writing. You know, the test tubes were poured into this, whatever, but someone did the pouring. So use the active voice. I poured blank into the test tubes. Make lists, bullet points sometimes are useful. Get rid of the words you don't need. Talk about, explaining this to your spouse or somebody else. Short sentences, nominalizations, I'll define what that is in a second. Don't give details you don't need. What are weak verbs? We'll talk about that. And be specific, don't be general. All right, what are weak verbs? Here's an example. There is no harm using cell phones inside the hospital. That's good, it's not great. A better way of phrasing it is using cell phones causes no harm. So making the verb into an action is more impactful. Or you can say, this has the tendency to make log browsing a tedious and ineffective process. It's better to say, this tends to make log browsing an effective process. So it's less weak, it's more impactful. Other plain language approaches, organize information that makes sense. Oftentimes, amateurs at this will just do a dump of info on the paper and move on. Oh, just put things in the order where, start off with something really interesting, hook them, other points, and end strongly on something that really matters to them. Use familiar words. Use examples that relate to their experience. Be direct. Use short sentences. What's short? 14 or 15 words. Use short paragraphs. What's short? 6, 8, 9, 10 lines of text. Okay. So according to this slide, which may or may not be true, we can only really process about 25 words any given time in our brains. Again, I don't know what the reference is for that, but assume it's true. And so think about 25 words as the limit of any piece of information you're trying to get across one time. Fewer is better, but 25 should be your upper limit. So aim for 15 to 22. That's about 3 lines of type in a document. By the way, I will give you these slides. Okay, so no need to take frantic notes. 1 or 2 ideas in a sentence. I won't go through all of this, just a few of them here. Explain complex ideas in separate sentences. There's something called the principle of 15, or the rule of 15, and that is no more than 15% of your sentences should have a lot of words. No more than 15% of sentences should be written in the passive voice, preferably none. And no more than 15% of words should be longer than 3 syllables, preferably none. Now, this is going to vary depending upon the audience and the topic. These aren't hard and fast rules, but just guidelines if you're struggling to make something sound simple. Other tips for making things readable. Use words that are accurate, be familiar. I struggle with this because I'm proud of my vocabulary and I want to show it off. And a lot of people don't understand the words I use. Well, you should learn those words. I'm not going to dumb it down for you, but it's the wrong approach. You should really meet people where they are. At the sentence level, use active verbs. Right? I mentioned that, use strong verbs. All right, I repeated that stuff already. At the sentence level, I'll skip that slide, it's not very good. Okay, more advice. I said active voice, make it personal, avoid jargon. Here's an example. From a medical website for parents, what is the incidence of asthma? From another site, how common is asthma in children? Obviously, this one is better. How many parents know what the word incidence means in a technical way? You probably know incidence is the number of new cases. Right? A lot of people don't know that. So why use that word when really common is fine? Okay, active rather than passive. I know my colleague Angel Foster is on this call, and she something that really bugs her and her students when they use passive voice. Use the active voice. Active voice is more clear. Passive is what bureaucrats use. So mistakes were made. By whom? Right? There's no accountability in that sentence. So why do we avoid passive voice? Well, passive voice, again, there's no accountability. We don't know who did what. Active voice, it's clear who did it, who's taking accountability, and who's going to do the thing. Passive voice is wordy. A lot of extra words built in here. Active voice is more concise. Passive voice is awkward. Consultation from respondents was obtained to determine the estimated burden. Whereas active voice, we consulted respondents to determine the estimated burden. Right? It makes more sense. It's natural. Okay, what is nominalization? We call those also hidden verbs. So conduct an analysis as opposed to analyze. Present a report as opposed to, what do you think? Just report. Do an assessment as opposed to test. There you go. Provide assistance as opposed to came to the conclusion of concluded. There it is. It's not hard. But think about how often you've seen this thing pointlessly. Okay, here's an example for you. You don't have to do this, but if you want to, try it. Can you rewrite this? I'll give you a minute, or just think about it in your heads. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommends a half hour or more of moderate physical activity on most days, preferably every day. The activity can include brisk walking, calisthenics, home care, gardening, moderate sports exercise, and dancing. That's not bad. Like if you were to read this on the website or something, you'd say, well, okay, that makes sense to me. But is there a way to make it plain language? And I'm going to be transparent here. I'm too lazy to do it. I asked ChatGPT to do it. And this is their answer. Moderate exercise such as walking, dancing, gardening for at least 30 minutes a day is important here. Yeah. Right. Next one. The Coast Guard has conducted an investigation to determine what carbon monoxide detection devices are available to recreation owners, such that, when installed and activated, could reduce the risk of being exposed to high levels of CO2. The silent killer, a variety of technology, whatever. Again, I asked ChatGPT. Before I show you the answer, think about how you would do it. Okay. Carbon monoxide is a silent killer. The Coast Guard recommends that you use a carbon monoxide detection device on your boat to reduce the risk. Done. According to recent epidemiological studies, individuals with suboptimal adherence to recommended vaccination schedules may experience a heightened susceptibility to communicable diseases, thereby contributing to increased morbidity and mortality. Again, That's something I would write in a paper that I'm writing. It's not offensive to me. There's no jargon there really, but there's a way to make it more simple. And again, in your head, think about it for a second. And here's one way to do it. If you don't get your vaccines on time, you're likely to get sick, spread diseases. Honestly, it wouldn't even occur to me to do that unless I gave some serious thought to simplifying it. I'm so used to talking and writing like this. So it takes effort to write simply. One more. Implementation of comprehensive evidence-based strategies aimed at reducing the incidence and prevalence of non-communicable diseases in states, blah, 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 blah. Summarize that as to reduce diseases like diabetes and heart problems, we need to do lots of things together, getting everyone involved, making better rules, giving enough money, making sure all health system works well. Isn't it amazing? Like you can see someone standing up and saying that aloud. Can't really see someone saying these things. I guess I had one more. Using population-based approach, public health interventions are designed to address determinants of health. Okay? Public health programs work to make sure everyone has a fair chance. So it's amazing because the first sentence right away you can see, so we can simplify it. Utilizing, that's got to go. Okay, that's all the plain language stuff. Let's talk about media training. Let's talk about pizza. Any comments online?
Nothing.
Does want a break, by the way? Okay, all right. Feel free to get some pizza if you want. So media training is a fun thing. I don't know if we offer it formally at this university. I don't know if universities in general offer. We should. We have a media office. I've never had any formal media training. I stumbled through it. I don't know if I'm good at it, but I've attempted to train myself and what I've learned there with you. But the media training offends me a little bit because it can come across too slick and too managed. And that could turn people off. There's an element of naturalness that has to be a part of this. So the media training that I'm going to present to you is more a way of dealing with maybe adversarial interview situations or how to prepare yourself for interviews and things like that. Then later on, I'll talk about, publishing papers, writing for newspapers, and things like that. But what I don't want to see if I have my brothers is people behaving like politicians, using, picking up pose and like lowering their voice at certain points, and saying, I agree with you, sir. However, it's overly stage managed. And I think it turns a lot of people off. And I said, when we first started out today, that we have a crisis of trust. And part of that distrust is people distrusting the packaged status quo that comes across really corporate and homogenous. You have to distinguish yourself as someone who's trustworthy and honest and personable. You can't put a price on charisma. You can't teach charisma. But if you have charisma, lean into it and unveil the charisma that is there. Take away the layers of practice, covering up your flaw, and reveal it. So let's begin. There are different kinds of media engagements you can have. Obviously, the one we all think about is television. And television has got this studio interviews. I did one yesterday morning. It's from my home this time, but that counts as a studio interview. It was live. Sometimes they're pre-taped. And if it's live versus pre-taped, it's a whole different dynamic. Remote, I guess I did that remote yesterday. Ambush is when it's more for politicians. They jump in front of them as you're leaving a meeting and can you comment on the report that came out today, sir? But sometimes it's not adversarial. Sometimes it's just, oh, there's an expert. Excuse me, sir, can I ask you a question about this thing that was released today? On the scene interview where you kind of accept it coming out of a meeting on a topic that's newsworthy, and the media says, hey, we're over here and maybe we want to interview you later on if you're available and come and join them. Or an edited interview, that's when it's pre-taped. The audio only is very common. Phone in, radios. I really like the phone in ones because you can walk around your house and jump up and down, wear what you want and pet your dog and things like that. So the stress is a lot less. Whereas a TV, you're looking straight ahead. And sometimes you don't see anybody else. You got to pretend someone's there. People don't realize that. One time I was doing one in a studio, I think it was Global, here in Ottawa, and they put me in the middle of like the reporter's bullpen, everyone's ignoring me, and there's a camera in my face, and the actual show is happening in Hamilton, and I have an earpiece, and they're asking me questions. I gotta pretend I'm on a panel, even though I can't see anybody, asking questions. At one point, the earpiece died, and I didn't know if the show's still going, so I'm smiling like an idiot. And then I kept on smiling. 10 minutes after the show was over, no one came to take me away. So there's a lot of artifice going on in these things, so be aware. Print articles are great. So oftentimes a journalist will interview you for a print article, and you can get some more interaction back and forth and really polish something well. And there's press conferences and things like that. Citizen journalists as well, people interview for their blogs or podcasts. So what to do if and when a reporter calls you because you've just published a thesis on a really important, gripping topic, okay? Should be layperson, sorry about the sexism, layperson's terms. Don't dumb down things, just use regular words. Use the jargon if you can, tell it to your mother. So explain it to someone in your family who's not an expert, and then explain it to the reporter if you struggle with this. Know who the audience is. So is it a newspaper? Is it like a podcast for specialists? What is it? And don't assume that the reporter knows anything about the topic, because they often know nothing at all. They've just been assigned the topic and they're coming into this completely cold. Okay. So I've stolen some of these slides from other places. So there's a quote here from a baseball player. What do I know about baseball? Nothing. So ignore that. What is the message? You got to develop your message before you go on the air. A message is bits of information you want your audience to know about. It's designed, packaged in a way to achieve a certain communication goal you might have, and it's repeatable to cut through the clutter. So usually as a factor, so I'll give an example of something that's cut through the clutter. It was 2021, end of 2021 or end of 2020, when there was a huge COVID wave happening in December in Ontario at the time, and the public health guru at the time was saying, you know, maybe around Christmas it's going to be okay. So people shouldn't panic. I think it might be over by Christmas. And the reporters asked me to comment, and this is my field. And my comment was, there will be no Christmas miracle. And then that went viral. There will be no Christmas miracle. I was, Scrooge or something. But the point is that cut through the clutter. And people can relate to that phrase. And it was factual. And it was tied to the actual factual answer, which is, no, this wave is not going away until January. So look for a way to, you can be polite, be forceful, and just get the message across. Sound bites. So realize if you're being interviewed, let's say not live, for like 20 minutes, sometimes they use like 10 seconds of what you say. That can be hilarious. Very excited. I've given that person my blood and guts of everything I know, and then it's a throwaway quote in like a 5-minute news piece. Analogies work great. Arm yourself with memorable lines. Right here, example. Premature babies don't have enough surfactant and may benefit from an endotracheal tube. It's better to say, when babies are born premature, the sacs in their lungs stick together when they breathe. So it's more visual, it's more descriptive, it sticks in people's minds. This is factual, textbook-like, what we're taught, and this is what people remember. So if you can tell your story in 10 seconds or less, that's ideal, because that's often the length of time that you're allowed on a broadcast. And 10 seconds is like 35 words. Here's an example from Joint Chief of Staff. I fear they do not know us. I fear they do not comprehend the full weight of the burden we carry or the price we pay when we return from battle. This was a quote about PTSD. Okay? But that's his message, 35 words, done, walks away, and he knows the fullness of it will be encapsulated in the broadcast. Okay, so decide the headline that you want. Keep in mind that you don't decide the headline. I can't tell you the number of times where I've done an interview and the headline is inciting and offensive, and I'm getting all this hate mail because of the headline, because no one actually reads the article. They read just the headline. And the editors know that and will create a headline to get clicks. And people will not read. So you as the person you interviewed, take the hit for a bad headline. But try to think about what a headline you would like, and that will dictate what you say. Write it down if you want, and if you struggle how to make notes for this, just have a heading statement and points. So sometimes if I'm on TV, especially if I'm at home, you can't see that I've got notes next to the camera, bullet points, scan, right? I do very little prep for interviews. Just do maybe 10 minutes of Googling, making sure my points are accurate, and have my points up there. That's it. That way I'm confident that if I ask you a question, I have the information on hand. Okay, you can be quotable by having stories and anecdotes. Again, figures of speech. There will be no Christmas miracle. A tripartite division. People remember things in threes, I find. So just saying, here are 3 things to remember about protecting yourself from COVID. Wear a mask, get vaccinated, and stay away from people. There's probably 6 more. But if out of 3, still got to remember 3. Okay, so think about things in threes, and people remember it. So there are some skills to be media savvy. Other skills are really 3 things: hooking, blocking, and bridging. You've heard these terms, possibly. You have. Okay, what are these things? Hooking is getting the interviewer along a certain path. You can use hooking as well in writing an op-ed. Hook the audience in. So you want to get them to ask a question that's in your bailiwick that drives the message that you want eventually. So I understand we'll be talking about blank today. Has that changed? Something that is bearing on the issue we haven't discussed yet is blank. Okay, so just get them into that mode. And very often you find that reporters are quite amenable to talking about what you want to talk about. Very often they'll end the interview with, is there anything you would like the audience to know? Here's your chance. So in the back of your mind, have ready the things you want the audience to take away from this. Blocking is when you divert a problematic stream of interview. Very often they'll ask questions that you're not comfortable with, that maybe are inciting, that might be offensive to you, that maybe just creates conflict for no reason because they're looking for clicks. Right? So how do you block it? Well, you can refute negative commentary. Don't repeat it, just refute it. Say that's not the case. To the contrary, this is the truth. Move on. And talk about a bigger issue. Like, I'll take an example. So I hear the COVID vaccine kills people. Like, a handful of individuals have died from the AstraZeneca shot. However, the larger issue is tens of millions of lives have been saved by the greater panoply of vaccines available to us. You have to remember that vaccination is the single greatest tool in the public health arsenal, and it's saved countless hundreds of millions of lives in the past few decades. So you talk to the bigger point and don't focus on the small thing that they want you to focus on. Bridging, on the other hand, is taking you to a new topic that you want to be taken to. So you answer a question, you address the question, but move on. You can say, is it, Dr. Deonandan, I hear that again, the COVID vaccine has killed 5 people in Zimbabwe over the past year. Okay, that's true, but what I can't tell you about that, but what I can tell you is that we're working on a new series of vaccines that address these issues here and there. Even more importantly, it saved all these lives. So it's not lying. You acknowledge what they talked about, also pivot to the topic you do want to stress. So to do the bridging appropriately, it's important to really listen carefully to the questions and to know beforehand what you want to talk about and be ready to pivot when the time comes and find a way to get back to the point that you want to make. So remember the point that you want to make. And this was something I had to learn the hard way, like in the early days of COVID, when I was so nervous because I was doing all this research in preparation for these interviews. And then it dawned on me after like 20 or 30 of them that really all they want to hear ultimately is the same 3 talking points. So the topic might be the new modeling that came out of the federal government. I did all this research on modeling to make sure I can answer the nitty-gritty questions about how to build models. They didn't care about that. When the lesson, the message really is, this will be over before you know it. We're working on a vaccine. Just keep each other safe. End of story. Just keep going back to that same message. Okay? So don't speculate. If you don't know the answer, say no. Now, people struggle with this. I've struggled with it also. Your ego starts to get fed. Keep asking you questions about things like economic impacts and the political fallout. I don't know. but I'm flattered that you asked. Let me speculate. No, don't do it. Because when you speculate, you lose that credibility again. And I've fallen into that trap many times, and I really regret it when I've done so. So they may present you with false information that you must refute. Don't repeat what they say. Just correct it, move on. Repeating what they said just doubles down, and when it's played again, as it will have been said twice. So more bridge phases. Before we get into that, you should know that I'm going to ask your question another way so that the audience fully understands. So it's okay to rephrase the question in a way that appeals to you. You probably notice politicians often don't answer the question. They answer the question they want to answer. That's a dick move, I find, but you can use something similar in a non-dickish way. We can acknowledge the fact that that's a question that I'm not prepared to answer right now, but I do want to talk about this instead, rather than pivoting without acknowledging the fact that a question was answered. I think it's more respectful, respectable, and will buy more trust in the long term by acknowledging the fact you're not answering the question. Okay, flagging is another technique. Flagging is when you use techniques to emphasize points you were trying to make. And you can do so verbally and physically. So verbally, as you can say things like, three main objectives are, or you can flip your hand saying 1, 2, 3, so it's visible if you're on TV. If you're on the radio, then you can just say 1, 2, and 3. But you preface it by saying the important thing to remember is, now we know that this is a thing we should emphasize, or use your body language. Look, I want you to understand this. Stare into the camera, stare at the interviewer, use your hands. So remember, it's a visual medium on TV. Use the visuals to your advantage. Don't just sit there and stare. As it's easy to do, especially if you're doing this on a computer from home, because you're trying not to break the blocking. So the producers will have you blocked in a certain way, not to cut off the top of your head, to make sure that your face is filled out a certain way. And you don't want to move too much this way or that way. So it's difficult to do all this stuff. But try. Yeah, it takes practice. So it's important. This is the thing that novices struggle with. Never just answer a question. Answer plus a message is the appropriate response. Remember what your message is. So answer your question and make sure the message is rolled into the answer. Dr. Deonandan, are the COVID vaccines safe? Yes, they're safe. That's not sufficient. Yes, they're safe, and everyone should get one because they have this level of efficacy, and if a certain number of people get them, we can drive down transmission to these levels, go back to normal much faster. That's the message. So answer or message alone is not an appropriate response. You want them together. So leverage your personal credibility, your expertise. If you're being called in for interviews because you know something. Maybe you've written a paper on something. Those of your students probably can't fathom being an expert, but you are an expert. Absolutely you are on the thing that you're working on. So leverage that and say that, because I spent all year doing this research, I understand that. These are other examples. From my years of experience, when I ran this program, my perspective as a former chief scientist, whatever it might be. So how you say something is at least as important as what you say. I don't know if these stats are accurate, but it's compelling. So what you say is 7% of the impact. How you sound is 58%, and 35% is, I don't know, what you look like, I guess. Yeah. Again, I don't know where the data comes from, but it looks reasonable. An example, the Kennedy-Nixon debate from 1960. You all remember that, right? Even I wasn't around then. But if you don't know the story, TV debates were new back then. And Nixon was a seasoned expert debater, roundly accepted as the superior debater. And Kennedy was the underdog, not seen as having a chance. And Nixon really was looking forward to this debate to finally flatten this competitor. What he didn't anticipate was that this was televised the first time. And Kennedy, much better looking guy, and far more engaging through his physical presence than Nixon is, who looks kind of goblin-like, very kind of greedy. The actual answers they gave, one could argue that Nixon gave the better answers in the sense that he was more comprehensive and compelling. But the audience response was that Kennedy won hands down because he was far more compelling in the visual medium. So again, it's not what you say that matters, it's the rest of the story, really. So it's a sad commentary, frankly, but think about if you're on TV, think about the visual impact. It's not just about being good looking, because, you know, we can't all be me. It's more about having presence and understanding that you're conveying things through action and by looking at the camera and looking at the other person on the panel maybe, and calling the interviewer by name and acknowledging what he says, whatever it might be. Okay, do not expect to receive a list of questions beforehand, but sometimes they do. I find the list of questions for live TV actually is discomforting. I don't like it. Like CBC News World did a bunch of those prime time ones, and they would send you the questions beforehand. I'm really nervous, right? So I've got the answers with me. I'm trying to remember the answers. And they start the interview, and like, here comes the questions. I know what the question's going to be. And my answers are robotic. I'm trying to remember what the next one's going to be. It's not useful. So what I asked them to do is just don't give it to me anymore. Just give it to me on the fly, far more relaxed. So some people prefer getting the questions beforehand. That's you, that's great, but don't expect it. And if you don't expect it, honestly, it's kind of better. You just flow with it. Don't expect to approve the reporter's story ahead of time, but you can say, I would like to fact check it, or I'm here to fact check it if you want me to. Very often they will ask to fact check it, but it's not guaranteed. Don't expect to tell the reporter what they should write about. They will write what they want to write. And lastly, do not expect, absolutely do not expect the headline to reflect accurately the content. It almost never does. That is frustrating and you have no control over it. More tips. Okay, again, if you're on the phone, whether it's live or not, stand up. Makes things so much. Walking and talking is far more natural and you're less likely to be offset. Improves your breathing too, strangely enough. Nothing is off the record. So be careful what you say, even when the camera's not rolling, when they're not recording. And no comment is not an answer. You can say something like, I actually don't know, haven't got a good answer to that question. I'll think about it. Or, I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask that question to. I haven't got the expertise. But no comment just sounds like you know something and you don't want to tell them. And you can limit the time of the interview, how much time. I've only got 10 minutes, gotta go now, you know. Things to do. Use short sentences when talking to media. Don't be afraid. Oh, this is a big one. Don't be afraid of silence. That's crazy, right? It's okay. Silence is punctuating, and it's never as long as you might think. Right? So even on the radio, oh, please go by. It's great. Silence is good. Think about the best radio interviewers you know and how slowly they talk and how they take long breaks. CBC and NPR is mostly empty space, right? Mostly silence. Think about it. Use simple language, of course, kind of like plain language. Get to the point. Don't dilly-dally. It's useful to give context about how what you're talking about is going to impact the audience, why they should care. So what part of this again? Try to stay calm. It's hard, especially if you're nervous. Realize nobody really cares. If you screw up, nobody cares. It's okay. No good to remember. And just be warm and compassionate. Think about the audience. It's even when they're being confrontational or adversarial, not that they will be, depending upon your topic. If your topic is one that is controversial, there may be adversarial aspects to this, but just be nice, it helps. Things not to do. Again, don't say no comment. No comment is a comment. Don't lie. Don't try to respond if you don't know the answer. It's okay to say, I don't know that. I'm happy to look it up later. Yeah. Don't speak off the record because nothing's off the record. Don't assume the camera's off. Remember that time here? I'm still staring at the camera and everyone's gone home, just in case. Don't speculate. It's a hard one. And that last one, I have not found a disreputable, duplicitous journalist yet. I find them all to be quite good people who are trying to get the best out of the experience, but I assume some can be problematic. Okay, you have zero control, they write. but you have 100% control over what you say. So focus on what you say and less on how it's going to be perceived. If you say everything appropriately, then you've done your part. It's other people's business what happens to what you say. The journalist's job is to get a story. Your job is to tell your story your way. Keep the job separate. You're not there to help them write a story. You're trying to get your message across. And you don't necessarily have to answer all the questions. More tips. As I mentioned, live and taped interviews are quite different. Different strategies, different approaches. Don't waste your time on pleasantries. If things are live, yeah, get to the point, ask the question. If it's taped, I usually chat with them a bit, how are you doing? Especially if they've interviewed me in the past number of times. You can say, good morning, how you doing? And then jump into the answers. Go into the interview knowing the answer to the first question. All right, look at that. So, especially if you don't know what the questions are going to be, you decide what the first question is going to be. Regardless of what they ask you, say, thanks, Bob, for that question. Before I get to it, I just want to say blank. So you've already decided what the first thing coming out of your mouth is. That's so calming if you know how you're going to start. You know you'll get your message out, or at least a part of your message, and you know you control the room when you have dictated what the first thing out of your mouth is. It's not dictated by them. So it's a power move. Don't always do it, but I find it's really helpful, especially if you think you're going to be nervous. So know how you're going to. You dictate that. No one else dictates it. Preamble, in other words. Spend time to develop a great preamble if you want. Like, if you're going to be nervous, and think about that first thing you're going to say and spend time thinking about it. Especially if they're universal truths, because no one can argue with universal truth. I just want to say first that we all want this pandemic to end as soon as possible. You can argue with that. You move on. Okay, final interview thoughts. I mentioned before, me personally, the slick media types just turn me off. I don't find them trustworthy. I don't find them compelling. So I don't want to be that. And I hope you don't want to be that either. So just try to be natural. Just protect yourself. Again, what, so what, now what, still applies. Always applies. Charisma wins every time. What is charisma? I don't know. But everyone has some of it. And I think when you see it, you know it. You know it when you see it. And try to find it in yourself. I think you find your charisma by being relaxed. If you smile, magical things happen. And before every interview, I sit there, I giggle to myself because I try to find the humor in it so I don't get nervous. And then that, whatever. Being trustworthy. What does that mean? Being trustworthy means, if you tell the truth, you are innately trustworthy. If you tell a lie, you are innately not trustworthy. Focus on the truth. You can get both charisma and trustworthiness by being thoughtful, like spending time and thinking about an appropriate answer, being honest and being yourself. We always say be yourself. This could be like dating advice also, right? Maybe, business idea. Anyway, so think of it that way. All right, last section today, down the tools of engagement. First of all, any comments, questions, issues, complaints, jokes? Yeah. How are we doing time-wise? Just zipping along. Okay. The tools of engagement. These are, again, how we can engage with the world. That's an AI-generated image. I'm counting the fingers. Okay, cool. 5 fingers. Excellent. First is infographics. Not everything is about media engagement. Some things are about actually creating product that talks to the world in ways that aren't peer-reviewed, boring technical papers. Infographics, everyone knows what that is an easy way of taking information and understanding it well. So here's one. Subtitle. Eggplant, leaf, tomato. But if you try to communicate proper nutrition, you can see here that rather than saying you should try to get a full array of fruits and vegetables and meats in your diet, have a picture. It's an understanding what's going on. I love this one when it's not blurry. This is one of my favorite infographics. Everyone recognize it? This is the image of base rate fallacy, one of the bugaboos of epidemiology that drive me crazy. Base rate fallacy of people not understanding that just because the majority of hospitalized people with COVID were vaccinated does not mean the vaccination caused them to be hospitalized. So it shows us, if you look just at the hospitalized population, these are the vaccinated, the unvaccinated, there are far more vaccinated people there, suggesting to some people that, oh my goodness, vaccination causes hospitalization. But the truth is, because there's so many more vaccinated people, they're a bigger denominator. In fact, the risk of being hospitalized is much lower in the vaccinated population. Okay, I can explain this to people in so many different ways using words, but that image, done. Move on, okay? So especially in this era of public health communication where people actively refuse to understand things, not just not understand, but they actually don't want to understand, that solves a lot of problems. And on Twitter, when people come at me with the same question and challenge every single time, instead of explaining it each time again, I post that image again and again and again, ends the conversation. Data storytelling is relatively new. This is something that's strictly an online thing. This is where you essentially create a website with images and data that goes with it, and it tells a story. It's one thing to post an image of death rates. Goodness, it's horrible. But what if it shows these are death rates in a background of palm trees and muddy waters, and it suggests that there's something happening in a certain part of the world. So you create a narrative around what the data means, and you turn it into easily accessible visuals. I haven't got a good example of this, except if you want to go to this link that you can look at after this is the slides, you can see what I'm talking about. I don't understand data storytelling well. It's new to me. I'm going to acknowledge it as something that is a growth area right now. Podcasts are huge. Podcasts are bigger than news now. Of course, the biggest podcast in the world was Joe Rogan. I think he was toppled by the Midas Touch podcast here this week. But podcasts are bigger than news now. His audience is bigger than CNN. I don't realize that. So audio-only podcasts are incredible. They offer in-depth detail because they're 3 hours long very often. Rogan interviews are 2 to 5 hours long. They're incredible. Whereas the news is 10 seconds here, up to a minute maybe if you're lucky. Free-flowing, seemingly ad-libbed, but oftentimes they are actually scripted. Rogan's obviously a free-flowing conversational one. The top podcasts in Canada tend to be like The Big Think and CBC podcasts. And I've been on those, and what we do is they send me the questions beforehand. We have a conversation. Then we converse. That's pre-taped, and then it's edited for punchiness. So it's kind of ad-lib, but it's conversational, but very produced. And I think more and more podcasts are like that. They appear free-flowing, but they're not really well produced. But the free-flowing ones, like the Rogan one, is cheap to produce. He just talks to some people, dumps it online, and makes hundreds of millions of dollars. So the scripted ones are interesting. So if you listen to BBC's More or Less, I love that podcast. It talks about numbers. It's fully scripted. There's people talking over the script, but it sounds conversational because they are engaging charismatic people. And it's pretty obviously scripted. There are no ums and uhs and hesitations. Still works. By the way, there's a terrifyingly powerful piece of AI software called Notebook LLM. You heard of this? Oh my goodness. It's free, by the way. Google makes it. Notebook LLM allows you to upload notes, book-length manuscripts, and analyzes them, finds gaps in what's missing, summarizes what you have in common, but also will create a podcast for you in seconds. A half-hour podcast of 2 human voices having a regular human conversation about the things you just explored. About 5 book-length manuscripts. 3 minutes later, there's a 25-minute audio recording of 2 annoying drive time DJ voices talking about this in really human language. Terrifying. The first time I listened to it, like, oh my goodness, those are people. After about 5 different ones, you hate them because it's the same 2 voices with the same idiosyncratic. Yeah. Yes, but I hate it. And there are people trying to make money out of this by just cranking out fake podcasts, slapping ads on top. But here we are now. Okay, video. The most popular video platform is, of course, YouTube, which is also the second biggest search engine in the world, by the way. You don't realize that. And you can convey content with a lot of complexity because you can show stuff. It can be conversational, it can be scripted, highly visual, or reliant on charisma again. It can be someone that's talking, oftentimes visuals. Good examples. I love these two. So this is Debunk the Funk. See Debunk the Funk? Debunk the Funk takes on anti-vaxxers and explains the science really well. He's a microbiologist. Really good stuff. Dr. Susan Oliver, same deal. She responds to medical misinformation in a comedic, insightful, simple way. Both excellent communicators, and I recommend them heartily. So that's a growing area for science communications. And I think students should do more of this, frankly. You got time and you've got youth and energy and charisma. You should, too lazy. Social media, of course, is the great battleground. And in Canada, amazing, Canada has one of, if not the highest Facebook usership in the world. We're the most Facebook-oriented society in the world. And YouTube is the other big one. Interestingly, TikTok and Twitter don't compare to YouTube and Facebook. They get all the media attention. Really, it's YouTube and Facebook that most of the stuff is happening on. And again, during the worst of the pandemic, I did a lot of my public engagement on Facebook. That's where a lot of people came to learn. I can converse with them in a more streamlined fashion and control the trolls better because I can block them out and, again, curate the message as well. Again, media interviews, we talked about that already. You can have a sudden mass impact on the population. If you think people need to know about something and they invite you on, suddenly hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people hear your message. And often that gets rolled into other products too, like radio broadcasts, like tweets. I've been interviewed on the radio, for example, and it becomes a newspaper article. It becomes a podcast topic for other people to talk about. So the multiplier effect is quite high. But high risk, high reward. High risk, it will expose you to some bad things. And if you really screw it up, a lot more people see. But high reward, much bigger engagement. Heavy reliance on your charisma for maximum impact. Policy briefs is something we don't talk about enough. We don't teach enough. Policy briefs can have really significant impact on policy change. And what is a policy brief? It's a summary of an issue from a policy mindset for decision makers to look at. It's not for the general public in general. So sometimes it's for the private sector, but mostly it's for government. And usually it's less than one page. So when I was a chief scientist for the government, my job was not doing science. My job was writing 1 pages for the minister every day. How boring is that? It wasn't boring. It actually was a lot of fun because I enjoyed reading a bunch of stuff and summarizing it. Okay? But now, of course, ChatGPT can do it better. You can read more about it to that link. Hope that link still works. So there is a method called the 25-5-1 model. If you can take a 25-page report, summarize it in 5 pages for your boss, that's great. If you can take those 5 pages, summarize it in 1 page for the minister, that's better. If you can take that 1 page, summarize it in a bullet point for the world, that's best. And then you can translate it back to 25 pages and roll it up so that the minister can bang on the desk in question period. That's even better. But these days, again, the AI can do it for you and go back and forth. It's annoying. But again, producing a policy brief can be impactful. If you're looking to maximize the impact of your work, do all the above. Start a podcast, get on the news, do what I'm going to show you next, which is write an op-ed. Write a policy brief and fax it off to various ministerial offices. It will be read. Blogs are out of fashion, but they have an impact. I showed you my blog, 500,000 readers in that 1 week, which is crazy. What I do is I start by blogging something. I don't expect anyone to read it, but then I use that to refine it. And maybe some people read it, give me comments, and I use that refinement to go off and publish it elsewhere. And it's a good way to speak conversationally in writing because the format just innately encourages conversationality. And it's a way to archive content. You know what I mean by that? Let's say the topic is vaccines, and you read an article about a malaria vaccine being trialed in Zimbabwe. That's curious. I'll write about that today. Tomorrow, okay, I'll write about vaccine against Ebola that's being developed somewhere in the USA. And so you can each topic is a bit different. You can streamline them out a bit more rather than dumping everything I know about vaccines into a blog. I found that so useful in my life. Like I go in job interviews and say, well, what do you know about this topic? Well, not only do I know about this topic, I can speak fluently about it because I've written about it. I can point to a blog post I did on this 5 years ago because it's all archived. And because I've written about it, it's filed in my brain in a way that I can think about it and talk about it much more comprehensively. So I encourage my students in particular to blog for the purposes of organizing their thoughts. But it can be impactful also. They'll also link through social media. So once you cultivate a Twitter audience, you tweet out a blog post, as I did this evening, and it gets feedback right away and amplified. They're essentially sloppy op-eds. What's an op-ed? Let's talk about op-eds now, which I think is probably the final topic. And I think really a very important, probably the best way for graduate students to leap into the world of public engagement. Anyone recognize this? The Federalist? U.S. history, as we may all have to know. The Federalist was a collection of essays before the U.S. Revolutionary War, written by Alexander Hamilton and some others, which started off the process. And all it was really are a series of op-eds. These are considered amongst the most important papers written in North American history. And they're essentially opinion papers that drove the national conversation. Now, these were pamphlets. I mean, they're handed before their newspapers were commonly doing this. But the impact, you can't deny it. The impact was substantial. Here is an evil op-ed. So this was written in '97. It's called Global Warming is a Myth. It's an op-ed written for Wall Street Journal. And it's evil because A, it's wrong, and B, it was formatted in such a way to resemble a peer-reviewed article. Look like is the science journal. And these individuals, the Robinsons, they're a father and son duo, by the way. You have to dig deep to find out who they are. They run a homeschooling unit in rural Oregon. So they're not scientists. Not that it matters, but that's what it is. They have reanalyzed climate change data to show that it's a hoax, it's not real. And the Wall Street Journal published this. It's an opinion piece. Now, they got a lot of hate from real scientists about this who asked to write rebuttals, including NASA physicists. This is nonsense. Let us write. And the Wall Street Journal refused to let them respond because they are complicit in the evil of the world. But the point is, it's an op-ed. It's not news. And it drove so much policy back then. For the longest time, this paper was cited by industry as a reason not to invest in climate change before the likes of Bjorn Lomborg, who's the current poster child for climate change denialism, gave even better academic cover. And yes, I'm on record for saying that. So what is an op-ed? It's not a news story. It's not meant to inform an audience. It's your opinion on how something should be done and why something should be done. So in your case, probably based on your research. So it's how to improve things, usually. And it's an opinion editorial. It essentially tells people what to think and what to do. Why would someone want that? Because you're an authority figure and they want to know what authority figures think about something. Op-eds used to be extremely powerful before the rise of the internet, but they're still powerful, they're still useful. They're entered into the public conversation. I write them all the time, not because I think they're going to change the world, but because it's now on record that I think this, and now other people cite it and leap off of what I've written to drive their conversations. Right? So if there's something that you think should be in the public conversation, get an op-ed published, and it will be taken up when someone does a search in the world for these opinions. And they're more easily to understand and to digest than, again, technical papers. So here's what I wrote recently, how Joe Rogan's vaccine debate pitch undermines real science. That went a little viral and got me a lot of hate mail, but it was important that that be in the public discourse because I didn't even know that he invited Peter Hotez to debate RFK Jr. on vaccines, and Peter Hotez, who's a famous vaccine manufacturer, refused, rightly so. And he got a lot of hate for this. So what are you afraid of? And so I wrote this op-ed to defend Peter Hotez, why he should not engage in this debate. And so when the intellects of the world started looking at the arguments of whether he should or not, this entered the conversation. It was ammunition for the pro-Hotez side, and I wanted to be part of that armament. So how do you submit an op-ed? All newspapers need and want op-eds. If they approach you, they will pay you for it. If they don't approach you, you don't get paid. There was a time not that long ago where you always got paid. So don't think about this for the money. It's not a lot of money. It's not worth it for the money. So some op-eds are commissioned, but most are not. Okay? Sometimes they hear about you because the research you've done, the paper you published, hey, we want a paper about this. For example, colleagues and I got a CHR grant to do something on mining. And so the Hill Times heard about this and said, hey, write an op-ed for us about the importance of mining and Indigenous women, or whatever it was at the time. So that was commissioned. So some op-eds are written by newspaper staff writers, like most are, but many aren't. Right? The rest are written by freelancers. So you either contact the editor with your idea, and you should. What do you got to lose? Just email the editor. I want to write about this. Maybe they'll ignore you, maybe they won't. You don't know. Or just send it to them and see what happens. And there are rules around this. You don't send it to multiple papers at once, one at a time. You can send multiple papers, but they get really pissed off. You do. You can afford to do that maybe once in your career, not twice. That's what I do. I just send it off and see what happens. And if one doesn't want it, another one will. So I shop it around. So they're about 700, 800 words. They have a single message. You don't want to clutter too much stuff. Focus on the message you're trying to get across. You got, again, 10 seconds to hook a busy reader, so hook them first. Get the important thing up front. Say, oh, I'll read this. That's great. And tell readers why they should care. Again, the so what. Why should they care? Don't be an academic. What that means, we brood, we obsess over analysis. Well, maybe this and maybe that, and I thought about this. Nobody cares. What they want to read is, what do you think we should do? Let's get to the point. There's time later on to debate the nuances in your peer-reviewed paper, or when they call you to do the TV interview. Right? This is not the space to obsess over details. Keep it simple. Target the general audience. So that's, unless it's a specific paper, that's for different kind of audience. But it's for like the Ottawa Citizen. It's because if the Citizen picks it up, by the way, it might be picked up by the wires, national, sometimes global. So think about the general audience who's got a reading level of grade 11 at best. Probably less than that, probably grade 6. Keep it simple. Short sentences of paragraphs. Use active voice again, but do not rant. Convince, that's your job, to convince. And follow the 80-20 rule. What's that? 80% should be new and 20% should be opinion. I gotta pick up my kid from school now. So what's it all about? So yes, it is your opinion, but not all of it is your opinion. A little bit of it is, but a lot of it is, here's some stuff you didn't know. Example. Maybe you didn't know that RFK Jr. is tearing down Health and Human Services using this, this, and this. Maybe you didn't know that this has impacts downstream for Canada in these ways. Here's what you should do about it. So the majority is information, and a little bit of it is your opinion. Be proleptic. What does that mean? That means there are going to be flaws in your arguments. Maybe identify one or two major flaws and get ahead of it. So it's like, oh yeah, it's true that he's got a good record when it comes to combating chronic illnesses, but that's not enough to overcome the fact that he's a crazy person with a worm in his brain. Right? So you got to get ahead of the arguments. Who's the audience for an op-ed? An ordinary subscriber. Again, at best, grade 10 reading level. Normal intelligence, average education, high school reading level, and they want to learn something from you, the expert. You are the expert. And they want to hear that you are the expert. Don't be shy about that. Like, I've written a paper on this, blah. And in your byline, if you're not a professor and I've got a PhD in this, or I'm doing a PhD in this, prove to them that you're an expert. That has weight in the world. So what Harry Truman called a one-handed writer. So it's just hilarious. So when I teach students to do well in medical school interviews, I say, do the hand thing. On the one hand, this, on the other hand, that. When I teach them to write op-eds, don't do the hand thing. Don't do on the one hand this, the other. Do on the one hand this, and only this. This is the thing. This is the thing you got to do. We'll do the other hand later in a different paper, right? Play your hand and play it hard. It's an argument. I mean, a while back, I did an online debate in the Toronto Star over whether or not the Japanese Olympics should be canceled due to infectious disease risk. And they wanted an op-ed debate. So it's me versus some other person. And so they didn't want even-handedness. They wanted me to play one hand and the other guy to play the other hand. And we went back and forth a little bit. That was kind of fun, right? So that's where the equanimity, I can't even say it, equanimity, no, we know what I'm saying, comes into play. It's in the cross conversation, not in what you were talking about. So here's an example. It was one I wrote about, you probably don't remember this, but it begins with, as a specialist in global health and development, started with, I'm strutting there, okay? I got to embrace my ego. I felt dirty doing it.
Great.
No problem.
Thank you so much. That was very, very
I will
good.
talk about you behind your back, it's fine. Right, so you really got to strut and prove that you're worth listening to, even though it feels icky writing it, it matters. So here's, and make sure that you end and sandwich your message. So here's a Hill Times article we wrote, opening, Canada's mining industry is an important player in nation's growth, okay? Close, policy path forward, then it could, so in other words, I've said the same thing in both the opening and closing, more or less, because I want them to understand that these are the important points you're going to remember. Question to ask when you're ready. Why should the readers trust you? Credentials, probably. Can you back up what you say? Have you got some evidence? What's new? Oh, that's a huge one. Is your argument different from what other people are saying? Don't just repeat what other people are saying. If you have nothing new, then don't write the op-ed. Stop thinking you've got something new to offer. And so what? Why should everyone else care? Big one. So an op-ed also consists of what? So what? That's the end, what I've got for you, except this last slide here, which is an exercise I don't want you to do now. Just think about this. And again, I ask them during PhD defenses, I often ask students to do this. Look for it. Is the elevator pitch. I'm sure you've heard the elevator pitch before. The elevator pitch is, you're going to imagine that you're in an elevator with someone of great power. Maybe it's Prime Minister Trudeau. Maybe it's Bill Gates. I'm not going to say the guy who runs the US because you don't want to be in an elevator with him. So miraculously, the security has been left out and you're in there alone and the door is closed and you've got their full attention for 30 seconds until the door is open. By the way, I know someone for whom this has happened with Bill Gates. That's hilarious. So explain what your research is about, why this person should care, and what you want them to do about it, right? And do it in 30 seconds. I remember this person is not an expert in your field. Can you do that? So don't do it now, but think about it. If you can do that, that means you understand what you are doing and you're passionate about it and you understand the implications of what you're doing. If you can do that, then draft an outline for an op-ed that explains to the general public what you just told this person in your head, right? So have a single takeaway message. Like, you should invest in women's education because this has downstream benefits for the world. Have a hook at the beginning. Did you know that only 3% of women have, whatever. And have 3 to 5 points to back up your opinion. And lastly, don't forget the 80-20 rule. And that's how you write an op-ed. You can crank these things out if you're passionate and have things to talk about. As I know you are. I know everyone is. So that is the extent of my presentation today, people. So please let us converse.
So we can take questions from the room and I'll put in a message in the chat too. We can take questions online.
Yes, I have a question. With ChatGPT, it's a little bit sensitive sometimes when you're in academics, just because there's some restrictions in using it, right, when you're doing your papers. So, and it's not also something that is good for the francophones, because it doesn't have enough sources of information for us to use. So so that's just a comment that I'm making for this. And sometimes when you meet with the media, you're kind of given a message a message to give out, right? And sometimes you do have restrictions on things you cannot approach your messaging. Has that happened to you?
So you're speaking from the context of someone who's represented an organization.
Yes.
Luckily, I am free from that.
Okay.
I represent the university. If I were, probably would have to do
Okay.
exactly like I'm doing. But if you have to do it, then you be a bit more. You're bridging options, right? Bridging this. You want to go down that way? Interesting question you asked. Not what to put down.
Okay.
Be polite, but bridge. So, no problem. Back this. But the ChatGPT thing is interesting because and if you have a research chair right now specifically to assess how to use ChatGPT in academia. and powerful ways I did not know about the fractal space.
Yeah, French doesn't have the same power as the English, and there's quite issues with it actually when you're using it in another language than the English.
To get back to your question about station. Back from and the higher up you are, of course. Yeah, some preparation. So, we prepare nature, let's
I think though, because I've had to do it in another context at the university, at the municipal level, I think that as long as you're authentic and you are saying, listen, there are topics I cannot talk about right now because we don't have all the facts. Let's move on to. So I think you can still stay authentic without saying no comments.
I'll tell you a story. So 13 years ago, I was invited on the Joe Rogan podcast 13 years ago or so. And this was back when a man named Peter Duesberg was arguing that HIV is not the cause of AIDS. It's the cause of AIDS. Right? He was creating a lot of chaos back then. And they invited me on to debate him. Debate word. And I was very excited because I was a fan back then. And I wanted to go on. So I contacted the media office here. I said, look, I got invited on the Rogan podcast. They didn't really know what that was. So I said, I got to fly down to LA and be in Joe's house. He's a big pot smoker, so I'll probably be smoking pot with Joe. Just be aware of that. Are you okay with that? I said, yes, we're 100% okay with that because the viewership is millions and you got some great exposure that way. And I was going to do it. I didn't do it for a lot of reasons, including I didn't want to give Peter Duesberg that kind of platform. It's messaging dangerous. I didn't do it because I was pre-tenure. And I thought, and pot was not legalized in Canada at that point. I'm going to expose myself to committing a criminal act on global, broadcast for the purposes of entertaining you. And I don't think the advice you're giving me is in my best interest. I'm going to say no. There's an opportunity where the university wanted me to represent them in a way that give them I guess notoriety is not the right word. I think, viewership without considering the implications for notoriety. That's weird.
Do you think that trust in science has diminished with what has been happening in the US?
Well, has it diminished or has the lack of trust now become more? That's the question. Can we just reveal that discontent with those in the brand? I think it has diminished somewhat because we have these powerful, charismatic figures like RFK Jr., like a cadre of malinformed or poorly intended clinicians who are spouting nonsense. So I think there is a contingent of a grifting population who are making money off of disinformation and sowing distrust. And they are creating a larger sense of distrust in scientists. So we are at a nadir right now in terms of our status in society as scientists, and we dropped fast. I don't know how we recover it. I think we have to invest in public education more than anything else. Having said that, the majority still have a high perception of science and scientists. They're a silent majority, and that majority has a deeper understanding and respect for what we do. So why they're smaller, they're more intense as a result. So there are trade-offs there.
But with that in mind, and what you mentioned earlier at the start of your presentation, that when we go public and when we're on social media, we have to be ready to take in negative comments as well. We seem to be at a more vulnerable level right now.
So I advocate to teach people books to graduate students, all graduate students, for the purposes of science, spiritual subjects. So when the hate mail started coming to me, I was not ready. I really was quite hurt. You know, it took me a long time to consider this should not bother me. It's just words. When it comes to actions, but right now, there are people who feel hurt and traumatized. Guy they see on TV. I didn't cause a lot of things. I didn't do that. I'm the one person they can identify because the minister's not available. You probably couldn't even identify who the minister is. So once I made the shift understanding that, yes, it's personal, but it's not personal. They just chose someone to attack. I was able to transition to a philosophical base. And I really started studying Stoicism and other kinds of Asian philosophy to get me to the point where I am now, which is understanding that words don't matter, except to the extent that they're meant to communicate. Words that are meant to hurt you, I can choose not to be hurt by them. And I want my students to understand that too. So find a philosophical base to wear as armor, to understand that your self-worth and resilience is not based upon other people's opinions and actions. Why should you give a crap about what a stranger thinks of you? Makes no sense. Care what your loved ones think of you and nobody else. But that, I can say that in words. It takes a while for that to be, embraced and digested by people. So we should start early by teaching that, I think. So there is ancient wisdom to be rediscovered for today's world. That's my argument.
Do you think scientists could be more involved in earlier education so that we catch the next generations to be more familiar with the way scientists present data? Because when I look at scientists going on TV, I mean, I've never seen them really when I was in high school or in elementary school. So should there be a place where scientists can actually participate or interact at the younger age so that we're more cognitive, that we can make?
I think that's a really good idea. Now, the challenge, the problem I find is what constitutes science. What is taught in public school as science is technology. And it's facts, not process. I think what we're missing is the philosophy of science, not science. Right? So explain to people, this is the process that we call science. This process is one of discovery that comes from a paradigm. And this paradigm states, there are a variety of science paradigms, but the main one states that objective reality exists, and I can approximate it by sampling the world. And each sample, I get closer to understanding, a deeper understanding of what that objective reality is. That's a very complicated way of saying a simple thing, which is that I don't know all the answers. I'm trying my best, which is what scientists do. That simple fact is missing in how we teach science in public school. So simply presenting more microbiologists in front of kids doesn't solve that problem. Until we teach the microbiologists, this is the issue here. It's the philosophy of science. It's not understanding what what a mitochondrion is. So it's not facts, it's process. And we don't need scientists to teach process. We just need good teachers to teach process, in my opinion. Yes.
Like an interesting perspective, I suppose, working in IPAC, we don't always communicate with the public necessarily. We're communicating with physicians, nurses, healthcare professionals, and there's all kinds of things that you can loop into this, burnout of healthcare professionals post-COVID, and all of those things definitely impact how willing they are to abide by new policies. There's also the whole concept of, oh, well, we've been doing this for 30 years type of thing, which I can completely appreciate. But this I guess is more of an opinion, but do you think that the public's view of what's being presented from a clinical perspective is changing the view of the clinic, like the clinicians themselves?
Or just some fundamental shift in the landscape. But my wife's a doctor and she's fed up.
Yeah.
The amount of disrespect she gets from patients is unprecedented. There's so much burnout caused mostly from poor patient behavior. Right? So something has changed in the population with how they perceive clinicians and how they relate to the clinicians. Part of it is, not having a doctor on call, on hand, an expectation that should always be there, is causing distress in people. Part of it is the new paradigm of health where more people are unwell right now as a result of post-COVID complications and things like that and other kinds of challenges. So the demand is greater, supply is less, and the frustrations are higher. Part of it too is somehow we've been taught that these people owe us. And even the scientists, that we owe them something else. We're the elite and we have garnered the lion's share of society's wealth, and the unwashed masses are pretty angry at us or something. So there is a narrative of revolutionary discontent that's being stoked somewhere. That's how we go back as well. There's a lot going on. It's very French Revolution here going on right now. Yes. What a weird way to end on. Nothing online? No one's paying attention?
No, nothing has come online. Any other questions, comments from the? No, okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr.
I get something, not just pizza. I get something.
There's a. It's from the Life Research Institute, and we are so grateful that
Pizza?
you and share your expertise.
Hope it was useful.
Absolutely.
I'll show them some.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. Thank you. Okay, well, yes. And you can take this.